I was thinking of a line. I watched a documentary one time about the making of Sound of Music, and Christopher Plummer was all keen for the role until he realised that he had to work with children, and he was not so keen about working with children because children can be a little bit unpredictable at times, and I just popped into my mind as I was trying to start my children's story there. But it's great to hear the kids having something to say, and it's good that they feel comfortable speaking up the front. And microphones, and it might seem a bit funny or a bit silly or a bit frivolous, but we're breaking down some sort of barrier there for kids to learn that it's really not that scary to have a microphone in your face and speaking up the front. And thank you very much for Lolita for your stories of running in the puddles, and thank you very much for my friend up the back there for her stories. I didn't quite know what they were for, but thank you very, very much for them. I'm sure that they meant a lot to them. It meant a lot to them. And so it was good as part of a family here to be able to enjoy and to celebrate someone else's life, even if we don't quite get all the details. Special welcome to Abby Me and Becky Me. Great to see you. All the way from Gin. Abby and Becky came with us on Teen Expedition, and I could never tell the difference between them, and it was even harder when it was being in a tent or something. Uncle Shannon, it's like, who's that? It's me. Who's me? It's Abby. Oh, Abby me. It's me. It's Becky. Oh, Becky me. So great to see you guys. We spent a week together canoeing, a bit more than a week actually, canoeing around up Gladstone, or not, north of 1770 sort of way, and we had a great time. It's great to see you ladies here. Great to see you. Mum, Dad too, Daniel and Alyssa, great to see you as well. I just want to say one thing just before I start the lesson today, the sermon today, sorry, and that is with regards to some things I've observed over the past couple of months, I suppose. I've been privileged, I suppose, to visit one or two other churches around South Brisbane here on the south side of Brisbane over the past couple of months. And I love going to new churches. I love our church here, but I do enjoy going to new churches because I spend half my time not listening, but just analysing what's happening here, looking at the dynamics, trying to read the congregation, trying to see how they do things, their order of service, just the general mood of the church. I like observing people, and I've noticed a number of things. And I'd just like to really encourage us here at Logan Reserve. For those of you who are visitors, just excuse me for a minute. This is a bit of in-house talk here. I'd like to encourage us here at Logan Reserve to be mindfully friendly. I went to one church a couple of weeks ago, and the only people who spoke to me were people who actually knew me. And when I go to new churches, I've got a couple of things that I do. I stand in the foyer, and I wait for someone to come and say hello. I sit in church when the sermon is finished, and I wait to see if someone's going to come and say hello to me. I walk to the bubbler where I ask, where's the water bubbler? I progress to the water bubbler. All conversations happen at a water bubbler. And these are the couple of things that I do when I go to a new church, and I just observe. And probably the last church that I did go to was noticeable. I stayed around, I waited. And the only people that would say hello to me were someone that had recognised my face. Oh, Shannon, hi, how are you? And they would go. The Pathfinder director came and had a good chat. That was good. We spent a lot of time together, various places. But it just made me think, and then I've also observed here at Logan Reserve, sometimes I just sit and I say, okay, so there's a new person. Instead of me going and saying hello to them, I want to see, does anyone else actually go and say hello to them? And so I sit and I watch, and I think that we do reasonably well. I haven't been a visitor in this church for about, 34 years, so I really haven't got the greatest sort of authority here, but just by looking from the outside in, I think that we do reasonably well. But as someone who's visited a couple of other churches around lately, and I certainly didn't take offence to this, but it really makes you feel good when someone comes up to you and says, hi, how you going? How was your week? You can be really, really vulnerable and say, is this your first time here? They might say, mate, been here for 6 months and you haven't noticed me. In that case, apology is the next thing you say. I'm sorry. But I don't know, just thought I'd put it out there. It's something that I've observed over the past little while. I went to one church 3 times, and on the 3rd time that I went there, I thought, no one has said hello to me in this church at all. And this was a church of over 250 people. I thought, wonder what's going to happen today. And the third time lucky, someone come and said hello to me. But anyhow, sorry for you visitors or new people here, but this is a little in-house sort of chat. Please, when we see new people, it's not just a case of, oh, g'day. That's a case of, I'm trying to squeeze past you, and it'd be rude if I bump past you, and so I say hello. That's not a hello. So for members of our church here, please be conscious to go and say hello to our visitors. It really, really, really means a lot to people to just say hello. How you going? It doesn't have to be huge. Talk about the weather. It's a great one. Maybe steer away from vaccinations and COVID. But just stick to the weather. Stick to the weather. Anyhow, I just thought I'd say that. Just thought I'd put it out there. Let us say prayer and then let us start today. Lord, please be with us as we open your word today, and may we learn some lessons from this, from what the passage we're about to read. And Lord, please may we be more like you, and may we have a better understanding of you and your mission and our mission for you by the end of this sermon. Lord, please send your Holy Spirit to speak to our hearts and speak through me, Lord, in your name. Amen. John 6, 1-14. I'd invite you to turn in your Bibles, click, tap, how are we going to get there, to John 6, 1-14. And we'll read this passage together. John 6, 1-14. It is very difficult these days with the whole electronics type thing. Back in the day, Dad used to tell me, just wait till you hear the pages stop rustling, and then you start reading. And now I'm busily trying to wait for, okay, I can't hear any more tapping, But I think everyone would have got there by now. John 6, 1-14. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. And Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in this place. Things have changed in Israel, obviously, since then. Whenever I see pictures over there, there's no grass anywhere. There was much grass in this particular place. So the men sat down in number about 5,000, not including women and children there. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that none is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the signs that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Who has heard sermons on the feeding of the 5,000 before? I'm pretty sure if you've spent any time sitting in any sort of Protestant church, or any Christian church, I should say, you probably would have heard reference to the feeding of the 5,000. And that's because this story has so many topics that we could explore. Number one, we could explore the fact that Jesus went aside, took the disciples aside to a mountainous place, and he was hoping to have a little bit of 1-on-12 time with his disciples. He was getting them away from the rat race and away from the bustle. We could talk about the fact that Jesus was very patient with these people, compassionate. He saw these people swarming around the countryside, following him. And Jesus knew that they weren't coming to hear what he had to say. They were coming because they saw the miracles. And he had patience on them anyhow. We could go down the line of the economy. We could take up the topic of the economy of Jesus. We could talk about the fact that Jesus blessed these people over and above more than they could ever hope on. From 5 little barley loaves and 2 small fish, he ended up with 12 baskets left over. And I'm not thinking that these are little baskets, or else I probably wouldn't have mentioned it. Now, I'm thinking these are considerable sized baskets, because Ellen White gives us the inspiration that these people had took these blessings home to those in their own community. Hey, check out what happened to us today. This is the miracle that Jesus did, and this is all the stuff that's left over, and I want to share this with you as well. But we're not going to talk about that. We could talk about the order of blessings. Jesus blessed the food. He gave it to his disciples. The disciples didn't say, "Oh, thanks, mate." No, the disciples passed it on to those people around. Jesus made the people sit down in groups of 10. He passed it out to the groups. The groups distributed it around. The blessings flowed from Christ all the way through to the people. It didn't stop at one point, but we're not going to talk about that either. Jesus supplies our needs. He doesn't just supply our wants. He had 5 barley loaves and a few small fish. This was the poorest food that the people ate. It wasn't cream buns and sticky date pudding. Jesus, pity, I'm sure they would have liked, I don't know. Maybe they don't like cream buns and sticky date pudding in the Middle East. But Jesus supplies our needs. And he blesses us with some of our wants. But that's not what I wish to concentrate on today. Today, we could have stopped at about verse 6. I want to concentrate today on the forgotten people in this story, the hidden ones, the one-hit wonders, the silent partners, the brothers, the sisters, the daughters, the sons of. I want to look at the insignificant ones who are willing to be used by God. The ones that don't often get the limelight, but play a huge part in this story. The first character is Philip. Now, tradition says that Philip was born in Bethsaida around about 3 AD, died in Turkey around about Hierapolis, in Turkey around about 80 AD, ministered in Greece, Thyatira and Syria, died either by crucifixion upside down with Bartholomew, perhaps, they wonder, or Nathaniel, Bartholomew. A lot of the disciples died by crucifixion upside down because they did not feel worthy to die in the same manner as did Jesus. Claims have been made that his tomb was found in 2011 near Denzel in Turkey, but they wouldn't have found anything there because there is about 2 or 3 pieces of bone in the crypt in the Basilica of Rome and some fossilised soft flesh of Philip, so they say, and so his relics are kept in the basilica. That's what tradition will say to you about Philip. That's a brief summary. Andrew is another person who features in this story, very briefly. Andrew, again, was born in Bethsaida. Probably should read my notes here. Hang on. No. Again, born in Bethsaida, a little bit younger than Philip. Died in Greece in 60 AD. Ministered in those Asiatic countries around the Black Sea, died by crucifixion on an X-shaped cross, St. Andrew's cross. And his relics, the poor fellow, is scattered all over the place. I was doing some reading today and his skull has been transported all over Eastern Europe. Poor fellow. He is all over the place. There's bits and pieces of him all over the world. That's what tradition says about Andrew, along with a few other pages on Wikipedia. But what's the Bible say? Let's go back to Philip. Philip is mentioned 8 times in the Bible. This is one of Jesus' 12 closest followers. 8 times he's mentioned. He's mentioned in the lists of the disciples in those 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts. And he is mentioned 4 times in John. Outside the list of the disciples, no other gospel record gives any mention of Philip. Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't feel necessary to be able to squeeze any of Philip's works into their 20 or so chapters. Only John. And what do we see about Philip in the book of John? John tells us that Philip was called by Jesus, and the first thing that he did was he went and found Nathaniel. Jesus called him. He said, "Hold on a minute, I've got a mate." He went and found Nathaniel. We hear of Philip again with the feeding of the 5,000. What does he contribute to that story? Well, basically, all he does is magnify the problem. A year's worth of bread, like a year's income, worth of bread, is going to give every single person a small portion. 200 denarii worth. That's as much as I earn in a year. It's going to give them a little bit. Philip's input into the story of feeding of 5,000 is basically just to say, this is a huge problem here. Our third reference to Philip, outside the mention of the list of the disciples, is the fact that when there were some Greeks, they couldn't come into the temple, the Jewish temple. They were restricted, a little bit like Boundary Road around Brisbane, where there was Aboriginal this side and white people this side. They had a boundary road around the temple, and the Greeks could only come so far, and they're knocking and saying, excuse me, we want to see Jesus. And so Philip went to see Andrew, and Andrew and Philip went and got Jesus and connected Jesus and the Greeks together. And then he said, Lord, show us the Father. That's it. That's all you know about Philip. And you can try and, deduce some things here. Okay, so he's called by Jesus. He goes and finds Nathanael. The Greeks see, I want to see Jesus. He goes and finds Jesus. So you can say, okay, so he's leading people to Christ and he wants to see the Father. But that's all you know about Philip. Other than that, the Bible is totally silent about Philip. This is one of the 12 disciples that Jesus chose especially. What about Andrew? Andrew, he's mentioned 12 times in the Bible. 8 of these, he's referenced as Peter's brother. Andrew, Peter's brother. Simon Peter and Andrew his brother. Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother. Simon and Andrew his brother. House of Simon and Andrew. List of the disciples. There he goes. He gets listed by himself in Mark. He's all on his little lonesome in Mark. Mark 13. Andrew did ask him privately for the signs of his coming. But then again, named Peter and Andrew his brother. Andrew, that was Simon Peter's brother, the city of Andrew and Peter. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And then we have that story where Philip told Andrew and together they went and brought the Jesus to the Greeks. And then we have a list of the disciples in Acts 13 and Andrew is listed by himself. What do we know about Andrew? According to the Bible record, apart from the fact that he was Simon Peter's brother? Not much. Not much. I can identify with poor old Andrew. My name is Shannon Howard, and oftentimes, depending which settings I'm in, I'll have to introduce myself this way. My name's Shannon Howard. Howard. You see the blank look come across. Howard. Yeah, my mum and dad's youth director, North New South Wales, goes, oh, you're Dana and Diane's son. Yeah, that's me. Yeah. Depending on who you're talking to and the age of the person, you might also throw in that mum was one of the Dorrington girls. There was like 4 or 5 of them, and depending on their age and where you are, sometimes that will help to identify you as well. But oftentimes it comes down to the fact that, I'm Dana and Diane. Dana, yeah, that's mum and dad. Yeah, yes, that's right, they were in Townsville. Or, yeah, that's right, they were in Hobart. I know they're in Newcastle now. Shalise hates it. She's my younger sister. Whenever she comes to Brisbane, it's, oh, you're Shannon's sister, are you? So, no, my name's Shalise. Actually, Shalise. It's Shannon's my brother. No, she hates it. She absolutely hates it. I had to ring her one time because I was speaking to someone and Shannon Howard. Howard. They're going, Howard. Yeah, you probably know mum and dad. They're youth director, North New South Wales Conference. No. Rings a bell though. Then all of a sudden it goes, oh, you're Shalise's brother. You're Shalise's brother. I went to college with Shalise. It's like, I've got to ring my sister. As soon as it's polite enough to disengage myself from this conversation, I rang Shalise and said, guess what? I just got identified as, and it was a bit of a family joke. I get it with I sympathise with poor old Andrew here. Out of the 12 times that Andrew is mentioned in the Bible, 75% of those he's referenced as Peter's brother. He's referenced as Peter's brother. Now, if you think we know not much about Andrew and Philip, what about Bartholomew? He gets mentioned 4 times. James, the son of Alphaeus, or James Celeste, is 5 times. Simon the Zealot, 4 times. Thaddeus, poor old Thaddeus, we don't even know what his proper name is. You could call him Thaddeus, Jude of James, Jude of Thaddeus, Judas of Thaddeus, Judas the son of James, Lebbaeus, or Jude, maybe even the brother of Jesus. And depending on whether or not you're Protestant or Catholic, And depending on your interpretation of the Bible, he is mentioned either 2, 3, or 5 times in the Bible. Of Jesus' 12 closest disciples, we don't even know Thaddeus' correct name. And we're really not even sure about how many times he was mentioned in the Bible. There are some small people that are mentioned in the Bible. Those one-hit wonders that just pop up for that brief section. But then you've got to ask yourself, what would the story have been like if these people were not there? And then last and not least, there is the little lad. We know nothing about the little lad apart from the fact that he was prepared to share his lunch. He was prepared to share his lunch. And we would not have had a story if the little lad had not been prepared to share his lunch. A number of years ago, Nana Dorrington was the secretary to the president, South Queensland Conference. Pastor Lawson was the president back in the day, and my Nana was his secretary. And before I went to school, it was a bit of an outing. We'd jump on the train and we'd go in to see Nana. And we'd have lunch with Nana in the conference office overlooking the river. And this was back in the days when they used to dredge the river, and it was always a highlight when the old barge would go up and sucking out those big muddy, just slop going everywhere. And the Brisbane River, too thin to plough and too thick to swim in. And it was a highlight to go in and see Nana and sit there and overlook the river and the train trip, and it was very, very exciting. And one day, as we were going into Nana's office, was right beside Pastor Lawson's, the president's office, because he was the secretary. As we were going in there, Pastor Lawson bumped into me. He said, "Oh, what have you got?" I said, "Come to eat my lunch with Nana." "Have you got some lunch?" "Is that my lunch?" he said. I looked at him and said, "No, it's mine." He said, "Oh, okay," and he laughed it off, and little kids, very unpredictable. And after that, I was the little boy who wouldn't share his lunch with him. And next time, "You're the little boy who wouldn't share his lunch with me." And it was a bit of a joke between Pastor Lawson and myself. One of the subsequent times, next times we went in there, I took an extra lunch for Pastor Lawson. I took an extra lunch, packaged him up his own little lunch, and I took it in there. We went and seen Nana, and I went in next door, knocked on the big door, president of South Queensland Conference. No one was there. He wasn't actually in his office. So I left it on his desk. And a week or so later, I received a letter. I still have the letter at home. And there it is, dated the 10th of October, 1989 even. I'm not that old. I was 7.5 years old. Mr. Shannon Howard, dear Shannon, just a little note to say thank you for sharing your lunch with me last week. It was a very pleasant surprise. I did enjoy the nuts and the dried fruit. I was sorry I was not in my office when you called. No longer can I call you the boy who didn't share his lunch with me. God bless you. I will always remember you as a special friend. Kindest Christian greetings, Pastor Lawson. I still have that letter in my box of useless bits and pieces that mean a lot to me. I digress a minute here, but this story wouldn't be complete if I didn't tell you that probably 20-something years later, Pastor Lawson was heading out the back door of our hall here, when Bess is back in the good old days when we used to have church lunch, and he was heading out the back door just as Daniel, my son, was coming in the door with a big plate of food. Pastor Lawson didn't know that was my son, and he said to him, "Oh, you've bought me some food." And Daniel goes, "No, this is mine." This is mine. And I saw it happen, and I raced over to him and said, "Pastor Lawson, do you know what you've just done? Do you remember that, way back then, when I wouldn't share my lunch with you? That's Daniel, my son." And I said, "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." But we laugh, but could you imagine what the story of the feeding of the 5,000 would be if we didn't have the little lad who was prepared to share his lunch? 50% of our congregation won't understand this. It's an important thing for a boy. You girls just have to accept it. It's an important thing for little boys and lunch. But this little lad was prepared to share his lunch with Jesus. We know nothing else about the little lad. Nothing else. But just that one unselfish act of the little lad changed the whole course of history for 5,000 people, and then for millions of people afterwards. It has created that story of which we can get so many illustrations. The widow and the mite. the widow was putting those 2 little coins, and there's a picture of the mite. You can buy it on eBay if you want. A picture of the mite. 2 of the smallest coins of the Roman currency into the, or was it the Jewish currency? 2 of the smallest coins into the money box at the temple. Not the Pharisees pouring the stuff in. Just secretly. And how many sermons have we heard on the widow and the 2 mites? That one act mentioned by Jesus has changed the course of history. We know nothing about the widow apart from the fact that she had been married at some point in time and no longer was. That's it. That's it. What about the little maid? She at least gets 1 sentence in the Bible. Oh, that my master, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. 1 sentence recorded in 2 Kings verse 5. And everyone talks about Naaman and dipping in the river 7 times and going back to Elijah and Gehazi getting the leprosy. And everyone talks about the witness of Naaman to the Syrian king. But it all came from 1 sentence, 1 recorded sentence from the little maid. Obviously, there was a whole backstory behind that 1 sentence. The little maid must have been a wonderful witness to Christ. She must have had the confidence of Captain Naaman and his wife. But we have only been left with 1 sentence of the little maid, and look at the change in the course of history from that 1 sentence. The Bible is full of little insignificant people who make a huge, huge difference in history. Now, apologies to those people who were here a couple of years ago when I did a talk very similar to this on a Pathfinder Investor today, but I wanted to expand on it and revisit it again and just rehash it again because I do believe this is a very important topic, a very important concept that we need to be thinking about. And to illustrate the fact that little insignificant things make huge differences, I want to go to the book of nature. Of all the creatures in the sea, whose favourite would be the whale? People spend thousands and thousands of dollars to go and watch, many, many tons of fish jumping out of the water. People love whales. They're incredible. They're huge. You put your ear in, you can hear them. Killer whales, very majestic things. Majestic things until they start eating other creatures and they get a bit barbaric. But when they're jumping around, they're beautiful photos. They're lovely things. People love killer whales. Dolphins. Everyone loves a dolphin. They're fun, they're playful. We lock them up in artificial cages and people pay hundreds of dollars to go and watch them jumping and pushing balls and bits and pieces at SeaWorld and Aquapark. Dolphins are incredible things. Some people like sharks. Some people are fascinated by sharks. Other people, not so much. Then again, there are the fishermen among us that chase the elusive barramundi or that big snapper. And sometimes, or most of the time, they just have to settle with the humble brim. But these fish, beautiful things in the world, in the marine life. And then we get the beautiful reef fish. The reef fish. These are the ones that UNICEF and all these Let's Save the Planet people, they put pictures of these things up when we say, let's save the reef. Shark fin soup. We've got to stop people eating shark fin soup. They put up dolphins as bycatchers for these large commercial trawlers. But how many of us think about the sea sponge? The humble sea sponge. Sea sponges, there's big ones. There's very big ones. There's little ones. There's tubey ones. All sorts of tubey ones. There's blob ones. There's some more boring ones. There's funny looking ones. There's just plain ugly looking sea sponges. But sea sponges are incredible things. A sea sponge, they have no brains, they have no nervous system, they have no internal organs, muscles, they have no method of movement, they have no circulatory system, but believe it or not, they are an animal. Who decided That's something that has no properties of any sort of other animal that we would consider an animal is an animal and not a plant. I don't know. But these things are an animal and not a plant. They spawn by their asexual type things. They reproduce. These little polyps float around. They sink to the bottom. Once they adhere, that's where they stay. They're fairly simple, very, very simple, multicellular sort of organisms. And as I say, they have no central nervous system. They have no brains. They have no circulatory system. All they do is just absorb things. The sea sponge. Not exactly the pin-up for Save the Great Barrier Reef, is it? But the sea sponge. So what is so special about the sea sponge? I wanted you to watch this for a minute, and hopefully it'll work. Have we got some sound? Hang on.
As well as larger particles. They might not look like they're doing much, but a simple demonstration.
Hang on. Did you guys hear that? Or was that just coming out of here? Coming out of here. Well, this bit here is plugged in. Do you want me to do anything, Jay? Do you want me to try it again? It always happens, doesn't it? Let me try again. No? Now it's not going to start.
Sponges are very effective filter feeders since they're able to capture and eat particles as small as bacteria,
Can you hear it?
as well as larger particles. They might not look like they're doing much, but a simple demonstration shows how effectively sponges can pump water. On a reef in the Caribbean, I make a dive with a syringe filled with a non-toxic dye called fluorescein. By squirting it around the base of some sponges, we can observe how the water is moving by watching what the dye does. Within only seconds, the dye is pumped through the sponges along with the water. As you can see, a sponge is a pretty good water pump and also a good strainer. Any plankton that goes in with the water won't come back out through the osculum. Tube sponges are even more spectacular to observe. They pump the dye so furiously that they look like a collection of miniature smokestacks.
I hope you could hear some of what was happening there. I'm sure a picture said 1,000 words. Anyhow, the sponge, the humble little sea sponge, sits on the bottom of the ocean. As I said, is an animal of some description, passed over by almost every single person that goes to the reef to look at beautiful fish, cursed by fishermen who snag them when they pull them up. But the humble little sea sponge is doing an incredible job. A sea sponge the size of a man's clenched fist can filter about 5,000 litres of water per day. And if we didn't have sea sponges in our oceans, it would be just a rotting, horrible mess in the ocean. Sea sponges are important. Sea sponges sit on the bottom of the ocean, overlooked by everyone else. They don't get the limelight. We don't spend millions of dollars saving the Great Barrier Reef because of a sea sponge, but they are the ones that do a lot of work. A huge amount of work. And here's the lesson for us today. And I was just looking at the time we need to cruise here. It doesn't really matter how big, how small, etc. you are, how blobbish, tubish, boring, funny or cute you are. God has an important message, an important job for each and every one of us to do at every single point in time. You know, we have got huge examples in the Bible of Bible heroes. Our early Christian church, Ellen White, James White, Jane Andrews, church's first missionary, his daughter, they went to France, they decided that they would not speak anything other than French, and she was the editor of the Signs and the Times at the age of 14 in French. Huge. James White brought 1,000 people to Christ before the age of 21. Massive sort of accomplishments by these people. Then there's some lesser known people, Frederick Wheeler, Rachel Oakes Preston. These are the people that brought the seventh day bit, the Sabbath keeping bit to Adventism. We have modern greats. Everyone recognises their face, and then there's you, and then there's me. And we kind of think, man, these guys are doing huge things. What is there for us to do? But it's so easy to look around and get discouraged Am I not doing enough? No one takes any notice of me when I am. And even if I wanted to, I can't do it as good as others. I'm too young. I'm too old. But it's time to remember the sermon of the sea sponge. We're not all going to be Daniels. We might be the little lads. We're not going to be the Peters. We might be the Simon Peter's brother. We might be the Andrews. I spoke to Anne a little while ago because as I was thinking about my sermon, a person came to mind, and that was William Thompson. I was touched at William's funeral, and I spoke to Anne about this. She's okay if I shared it. I didn't want to say anything before I spoke to Anne, but I was touched. Does anyone know William Thompson? You remember William Thompson? William Thompson had some health issues. He had a bit of a leg problem, and for other issues, poor guy. He had a rough life. He was always left behind as a kid because he was not athletic. He couldn't run. Poor William. But the funeral and the people who got up at the funeral, William made a huge difference to those around him. Many people would say, I came to Townsville Church or Aikenvale Church, I think it was, and William was the first person that came and said hello to me. I didn't have anywhere to stay, and William invited me to his home. I was on a bit of a loose end, and William would bring me over to his place for a feed. Couldn't handle the curry or the chili, but he invited me over anyhow. Time and time again, people would say, William was that first point of contact. William said this, William said that, William opened his home, William opened his pantry. William. Sometimes, we get stuck with the great achievers. We get stuck with the pastors, the elders, the deacons. And you think, I'm just a person in the congregation. Doesn't matter. Jesus wants you to be you. He wants me to be me. And God wants willing workers in all shapes, all sizes, just to be willing to do what he wants to do. He might have a small job that only you can do. It might just be the sharing of your lunch, like the little lad. We have no other record of the little lad in the whole of the Bible, as I said before, only for the fact that he shared his lunch, and then we have a massive story that comes from it. You might be that person that's called to share your lunch, or something that's seemingly so insignificant at that time. It's small actions of willing people that make great men and women for God. It really is. It's those little things by the little bits and pieces that sit on the bottom of the ocean that help us keep our oceans clean. It's those small actions. It's, people come in all shapes and sizes, but the jobs for Christ come in all shapes and sizes as well. I am also drawn to some stories that happened just prior to 1844. And I believe that the closer we get to the end of time, I believe we are living in the end of time, and the closer we get there, it's going to be the actions of the little people that are going to make those big consequences for Christ. It's going to come a point in time where the big high-profile people of our church don't have the influence anymore. They're silenced. They're the visible people. They're the easy ones to target. It's the little people that sit in our congregations. It's the yous and the me's that we're going to be the ones that are going to have to finish the message of God. And it's happened before. The Lord used little children to introduce the work. The first of this manifestation was the summer 1843 in southern Sweden. A little girl only 5 years of age who had never learned to sing, read or write, one day in a most solemn manner sang correctly a long Lutheran hymn, and then with great power proclaimed the hour of his judgment is come and exhorted the family to get ready to meet the Lord. Little kids are getting up and preaching. Kids would be playing. They were not allowed in some of these northern European countries to preach unless you had a license. And these little kids, the adults would get together in the room, the little kids would be playing on the ground. All of a sudden, they'd talk and they'd preach a sermon. They'd go back to playing with their blocks. And I don't remember who the author of this book was that I quoted. There's the reference down there if you want to check it out. I'm thinking it was Haskell or Andrews, one of the two, had gone back to Sweden in these places in 1896 and had chased down one of these people who had actually preached. I said to one of them, you preached the Advent message when you were a boy. He replied, I preached. Yes, I had to preach. I had no devising in the matter. A power came upon me. I uttered that which was compelled. I uttered what I was compelled by that power to utter. We need to be willing. It's not going to be big people that finish the work of God as we come as we come to the end of time. We all have our own jobs to do. We might be that little lad, we might be that little maid, we might be the widow's mite, we could be the humble sea sponge. The Lord said to Jeremiah, do not say I am a child or I'm too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, do not be afraid of their faces, it says in the Old King James, for I am with you. Whoever shall give a cup of water in my name because you belong to Christ, verily I say to you, he'll not lose his reward. The little lad sharing his food, sharing a drink, these simple actions. I say to you, whoever will give a vast evangelistic campaign, no, those little actions. The king will say to them, amen, I say to you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it for me. The little actions. It's the little actions by the little people of the Bible. So I need to wrap up, but let's do whatever we can with wherever we are, with whatever we have, for whoever we come in contact with. It had been a stormy night, and as was his habit, every morning a gentleman went for a walk along the beach. He was privileged enough to live by the beach, and he had a habit of walking along the beach, and the storm had blown over and the day was fine. And so he went for his morning walk, and as he was walking along the beach, there were hundreds of starfish washed up along the beach from the storm the night before. And as he walked, he didn't slow. He'd just bend down and pick one up and throw it back. Bend one down, pick it up and throw it back. Bend one down, pick it up and throw it back. And a person came up to me, and he'd been observing him. He said, what are you doing? He said, how on earth are you going to clear this beach of starfish? He said, what difference do you really think you're going to make? There are thousands of starfish here. He bent down and picked up another one. He said, well, I made a difference to that one, didn't I? God calls us to be willing to be used by him in any little way that we possibly can. Don't forget, it's the little actions of willing men and women that make great men and women for God. Did I get that right? I hope I did. I'm sure you understood what I was saying. It's those little actions, and I pray that we are willing. I pray that we do not have the pride in our hearts to be that person up the front, to have that top job just because you're not a pastor or you're not the president or you're not, John Carter and running the Carter Report doesn't mean that we can't do things for Christ. Let's remember the story of the starfish, the story of the sea sponge, the story of little lad, the little maid, and so many others. Thank you.
Let's complete our service here this morning with singing 602, "O Brother Be Faithful."
Sorry about the time, everyone, but if you just bow your heads. Lord, thank you that you have brought us here together. Thank you for the many stories that you have given us in the Bible. And Lord, there is multiple lessons to be learned from each and every story that you have given us. Lord, today we focused on some of the people that don't get a lot of a mention in the Bible, the Phillips. Peter's brother, Andrew, I think his name was. Little lad, little maid, the woman with her 2 mites, the sea sponge. Lord, as we get closer and closer to the end of time, may we be faithful, Lord, in everything that we say and that we do. May we be able to do those little 1%ers, Lord, those little bits and those little actions for you. May they not go unnoticed. May we not think them insignificant, Lord, because those little actions have huge impacts on the course of history and the impacts on other people's lives. Lord, please may we remember that it is the small actions of willing people that make great men and women for God. And Lord, please may we not be proud and boastful and striving for the mastery and striving to be the best and the person up the front or the one that everyone sees or everyone knows the name or the face. Lord, as the sea sponges of the congregation, that we're going to do as much to finish your work, Lord, as anybody else. May we be faithful to do those little jobs, those little things, that smile, that sharing, that compassionate, just that friendly hello. May we be faithful, Lord, for when you come again. May each and every one of us play the part that you have for us to play, that job that you have for each and every one of us to do. In your name, amen.